Your ancestral history may be influencing far more than your eye color or your last name. It may be shaping your fears, your patterns in love, your financial ceiling, even the way you respond to opportunity. Science calls it epigenetics. Mystics call it ancestral imprinting. Either way, the past is not as finished as it looks. There is a reason certain cycles repeat in families for generations. There is a reason trauma echoes. There is a reason some connections feel destined while others collapse without explanation. Beneath the surface of personality and circumstance lies biology interacting with belief, and that interaction is powerful. In this video, we are going to explore how ancestral memory, genetic expression, and energetic conditioning intersect. You will learn what epigenetic inheritance actually means according to modern research. You will understand how stress responses can be passed down through generations. You will discover why unresolved emotional patterns can feel like fate. And you will see how awareness can interrupt cycles that once seemed permanent. Researchers in the field of epigenetics have uncovered something extraordinary. DNA is not a fixed script. It is more like a dynamic library. Environmental stress, trauma, nutrition, and even social experiences can influence which genes switch on and which remain silent. Studies on descendants of famine survivors and war survivors suggest that the body can carry biochemical echoes of experiences that occurred decades earlier. These changes do not rewrite the genetic code itself, but they do alter how it is expressed. That means the past can whisper through biology. However, biology is not destiny. Gene expression responds to environment. It responds to perception. It responds to internal state. This is where transformation becomes possible. When individuals shift chronic stress patterns, regulate their nervous systems, and adopt new cognitive frameworks, measurable biological changes can follow. Neuroplasticity and epigenetic flexibility work together. The brain rewires. The body recalibrates. This is where the language of energy begins to overlap with science. Ancient spiritual traditions describe something called lineage clearing. Modern psychology describes breaking generational trauma cycles. Neuroscience explains how patterned neural pathways reinforce predictable behavior. 3 languages, 1 core insight. Patterns continue until awareness interrupts them. Throughout this video, you will learn practical ways to identify inherited behavioral loops. You will learn how attachment patterns form and why they often mirror parental dynamics. You will learn how chronic fight, flight, freeze, or fawn responses may not originate solely from your own experiences, but from an inherited nervous system sensitivity shaped before you were born. There is also a lesser-known layer to this conversation. Stress hormones can influence gene markers in reproductive cells. That means experiences can shape biological signals before the next generation even arrives. The body prepares for danger based on past threat. If ancestors lived in prolonged instability, the nervous system may calibrate toward hypervigilance. That calibration can feel like personality. It can feel like intuition. It can feel like destiny. Often, it is conditioning. But here is where the story turns. The same mechanisms that encode stress can encode resilience. Supportive environments, emotional regulation practices, consistent safety, and meaningful connection can shift gene expression toward health. Research on mindfulness, breath regulation, and trauma therapy shows measurable reductions in inflammatory markers and stress reactivity. Calm is not just a feeling, it is biochemical. When people speak about activating higher potential or aligning with a higher timeline, there is a psychological truth beneath the poetry. When internal regulation stabilizes, perception shifts, decision-making shifts, Attraction patterns shift. The external world begins to reflect internal coherence. This is not about bypassing reality. It is about understanding how deeply internal states shape lived outcomes. You will also learn why separation often feels so real in relationships that are intense or transformative. Attachment science reveals that bonding hormones, early developmental experiences, and nervous system attunement create powerful relational imprints. When those imprints are activated, the body responds as though survival is at stake. That intensity can be misinterpreted as destiny, cosmic design, or spiritual testing. Sometimes it is unresolved attachment circuitry seeking completion. Understanding this does not remove the mystery of connection. It empowers choice within it. There is suspense in realizing that many struggles attributed to fate may actually be inherited patterning. There is liberation in recognizing that patterns can be updated. The brain is plastic throughout life. Gene expression is responsive. Emotional memory can be reprocessed. Trauma can be integrated. Cycles can close. Another lesser-known fact involves the vagus nerve, a key component of the parasympathetic nervous system. Its regulation influences heart rate variability, emotional resilience, digestion, and even social engagement. Practices that stimulate vagal tone, such as controlled breathing, humming, cold exposure, and safe relational bonding, can gradually shift baseline stress responses. Small daily interventions can compound into profound recalibration. This is where biology meets empowerment. By the end of this video, you will understand how ancestral stress imprints form, how they manifest in modern life, how relational dynamics activate inherited patterns, and how intentional practices can begin shifting your internal blueprint. You will walk away with grounded tools rooted in neuroscience and psychology while still appreciating the poetic language that describes transformation as awakening or alignment. Stay with this journey until the end because the final segment brings everything together. We will connect the science of epigenetic flexibility with practical daily rituals that stabilize your nervous system, clarify your perception, and interrupt generational loops. The final insight reframes transformation not as a dramatic external event, but as a series of subtle biological upgrades that accumulate into visible change. Cycles feel eternal until they break. Patterns feel permanent until awareness dissolves them. The past feels powerful until the present becomes more regulated than the memory. Transformation does not require mystical intervention. It requires understanding, consistency, and the courage to examine inherited narratives. The more conscious your internal state becomes, the less control unconscious imprinting holds over your future. Your biology is listening to your environment. Your nervous system is listening to your thoughts. Your relationships are responding to your internal calibration. When coherence replaces chaos, outcomes shift. This channel is dedicated to exploring the intersection of science, consciousness, psychology, and transformation without losing the wonder that makes growth feel profound. If this conversation resonates with you, stay until the final moment and reflect on which inherited pattern you are ready to release. Welcome to our channel. Subscribe and join us as we continue decoding the hidden architecture of human potential, one layer at a time. The ancestral override begins with recognition, not blame, not resistance. Recognition. Inherited genetic distortions and stagnant family patterns often operate like invisible anchors, quietly tethering perception, behavior, and expectation to timelines shaped long before conscious awareness emerged. These distortions are not flaws in your design. They are adaptive responses to environments that demanded survival over expansion. Scarcity thinking, hypervigilance, emotional suppression, relational instability. These patterns once protected someone in your lineage. Over time, however, survival coding can crystallize into limitation, subtly reinforcing lower trajectories of possibility. Epigenetic research shows that stress responses can be transmitted across generations through changes in gene expression. Trauma does not only live in story, it can live in physiology. A nervous system conditioned by prolonged instability may default to defensiveness even in safe conditions. That default shapes decisions. Decisions shape outcomes. Outcomes reinforce belief. The loop continues, appearing as fate when it is often inherited calibration. Recognizing this is the first override. When you see the pattern as a legacy imprint rather than a personal defect, you begin loosening its hold. Within this inherited architecture lies what can be described as energetic debris, unfinished emotional cycles, suppressed grief, unresolved relational ruptures. In psychological language, these manifest as attachment wounds and conditioned narratives about worth and belonging. In spiritual language, they are distortions in the field, creating the persistent illusion of separation from a counterpart or from wholeness itself. When the body carries ancestral memory of abandonment or betrayal, connection can feel unsafe even when it is deeply desired. The longing intensifies, the fear intensifies. Separation appears external, yet its roots often trace back through lineage. Identification requires honesty. Where does reactivity spike disproportionately? Where does longing turn into obsession? Where does independence mask fear of intimacy? These are not random traits. They are coded responses seeking resolution. By tracing emotional intensity back to its origin, you begin to differentiate between present reality and inherited echo. The illusion of separation weakens when the nervous system no longer confuses past threat with present connection. Shifting from the victimhood of biological history to the empowerment of the cosmic architect involves conscious participation in your own rewiring. Neuroplasticity confirms that repeated thought and behavior patterns strengthen neural pathways. Change the pattern consistently and the pathway shifts. Regulate the nervous system deliberately and gene expression can recalibrate. Choosing to overwrite legacy codes is not denial of history. It is authorship beyond it. Each regulated breath, each boundary set without guilt, each decision aligned with expansion rather than fear becomes a signal to the body that the timeline has changed. The anchor loosens further, and a new trajectory begins stabilizing in real time. The crystalline DNA activation begins as an internal shift rather than an external event. It is the movement from contraction into coherence, from fragmentation into resonance. In biological terms, your internal state determines hormonal balance, neural signaling, immune response, and gene expression. In energetic language, that same internal state determines your vibrational frequency. When stress dominates, the body emits survival chemistry. When regulation and clarity dominate, the body produces signals associated with growth, repair, and expansion. Accessing the original cosmic frequency is less about acquiring something new and more about stabilizing into a regulated, elevated baseline that allows dormant potential to express. The crystalline template symbolizes structural coherence. Crystals form through precise molecular alignment, each atom positioned in ordered geometry. Similarly, when your thoughts, emotions, and physiology align, a kind of internal geometric stability emerges. Heart rate variability increases. Brain wave patterns synchronize. The nervous system transitions from chronic defense into adaptive responsiveness. This high vibrational resonance is not abstract mysticism. It correlates with measurable states of parasympathetic activation and neural integration. As internal noise quiets, perception sharpens. As coherence increases, intuition feels clearer because cognitive interference decreases. Engaging in cellular recalibration involves consistent practices that signal safety and expansion to the body. Breath regulation shifts carbon dioxide levels and directly influences vagal tone. Focused attention alters neural firing patterns. Emotional processing reduces stress hormone cascades that otherwise maintain inflammatory states. Over time, these interventions influence gene expression pathways related to repair and resilience. The physical body begins to mirror the non-dualistic nature of the higher self in a grounded way. Instead of oscillating between extremes of overactivation and shutdown, physiology stabilizes into balance. Balance reduces internal conflict. Reduced conflict creates the felt sense of unity, often described as higher consciousness. Bridging the gap between your current physiological state and dormant multidimensional potential requires repetition and intention. Multidimensional DNA can be understood as the vast percentage of genetic material that does not code directly for proteins but plays regulatory roles still being uncovered. Its complexity suggests untapped capacity. When perception shifts from threat-based filtering to opportunity-based awareness, neural networks reorganize. The world appears different because the brain is processing it differently. That shift can feel immediate when coherence reaches a threshold. The body relaxes, the mind clarifies. Separation dissolves into interconnected awareness, not as fantasy, but as a direct consequence of recalibrated biology aligning with expanded perception. Timeline collapse and non-dual resonance begins with a shift in understanding how experience organizes itself around identity. Every decision, reaction, and expectation emerges from an internal frequency, a composite of beliefs, nervous system calibration, emotional memory, and self-concept. When that frequency changes, the range of available outcomes changes with it. Outdated and incompatible timelines dissolve not through force, but through irrelevance. They can no longer stabilize because the internal conditions that once sustained them are no longer present. In psychological terms, perception acts as a filter. The brain continuously scans for evidence that confirms its dominant narrative. If the narrative is rooted in abandonment, it highlights signs of withdrawal. If it is rooted in worthiness, it registers reciprocity. Aligning with your highest frequency means stabilizing into the version of yourself that no longer rehearses limitation as identity. As neural pathways reorganize around expansion rather than defense, choices shift subtly but consistently. Those shifts compound. The timeline, once fueled by fear, loses energetic supply. Without reinforcement, it collapses. Moving beyond the chase and run paradigm requires recognizing its biological roots. Pursuit and avoidance are nervous system strategies shaped by attachment conditioning. The more one chases, the more the other withdraws, because both are operating from dysregulation. Embodying the frequency of the union you seek means regulating the internal polarity that created the dynamic. Instead of projecting fulfillment outward and waiting for validation to return, you generate coherence within. Emotional steadiness replaces urgency. Presence replaces anticipation. The body no longer signals lack. In that steadiness, relational patterns reorganize naturally because the stimulus that once triggered imbalance has dissolved. Non-dual resonance emerges when internal and external are no longer experienced as opposing forces. There is no grasping, no resisting. Action flows from alignment rather than fear of loss. This state often produces what feels like time compression. The distance between intention and manifestation narrows because hesitation decreases. Cognitive dissonance reduces. Decision-making becomes cleaner. When intention is not contradicted by subconscious doubt, energy moves without fragmentation. The sensation of acceleration is not mystical distortion of time, but the result of reduced internal friction. Opportunities that once felt distant appear synchronized. Conversations unfold with unexpected ease. Circumstances reorganize around clarity because behavior has reorganized around coherence. As resonance stabilizes, the gap between desire and embodiment fades, and reality begins reflecting the frequency already anchored within. The mirror effect of external reality reveals itself in subtle, undeniable patterns. The physical world does not randomly assemble around you. It responds to the signals you continuously broadcast through belief, emotion, posture, tone, and expectation. Neuroscience describes predictive processing, the brain's tendency to interpret incoming data according to pre-existing models. Psychology describes projection and confirmation bias. Energetic language describes vibration. All point toward the same principle. Perception and expression shape experience in real time. The world reflects internal organization with startling precision. When the nervous system is dysregulated, the environment appears unstable. Neutral expressions seem hostile. Delays feel like rejection. Silence feels like abandonment. These interpretations trigger defensive behavior, which then elicits corresponding reactions from others. The loop completes itself, appearing as external proof of internal fear. Conversely, when regulation stabilizes and self-concept shifts toward wholeness, microsignals change. Eye contact softens, voice steadies, decisions become less reactive. Others unconsciously respond to these cues. The reflection shifts because the signal shifted. Attempting to manipulate the outside world keeps attention fragmented. Effort becomes focused on controlling outcomes, persuading others, or forcing timing. This reinforces the belief that fulfillment exists externally and must be captured. The more control is exerted, the more tension enters the system. Tension distorts perception. The mirror responds accordingly. Redirecting focus inward interrupts this cycle, maintaining the internal state of the twin flame frequency. Coherence, self-trust, emotional sufficiency creates a stable broadcast. Instead of chasing validation, you embody alignment. Instead of scanning for reassurance, you generate certainty. This internal steadiness influences relational dynamics at a foundational level. People attune to emotional states automatically through mirror neurons and subtle behavioral cues. When your baseline is grounded rather than grasping, interactions reorganize. Those unable to resonate with the new frequency gradually fall out of alignment. Those capable of meeting it move closer with less resistance. Events that once felt blocked begin flowing because the behaviors that created friction are no longer active. As coherence deepens, the speed of reflection increases. Situations recalibrate with surprising efficiency. Conversations resolve faster. Opportunities surface with precise timing. Environments that once reinforced contraction begin dissolving from your reality. The crystalline blueprint, defined by internal clarity and regulated presence, acts as an organizing field. External structures adjust to match it because behavior, choice, and perception now align with expansion rather than distortion. The mirror does not judge or delay. It simply reflects the architecture you maintain within. Embodying the highest timeline requires more than insight. It requires integration. Elevated states experienced in moments of clarity must be woven into ordinary routines so that expansion becomes baseline rather than exception. The nervous system learns through repetition. Neural pathways strengthen through consistent activation. When high frequency shifts, coherence, self-trust, emotional regulation are practiced daily, they transition from temporary peaks into stable traits. Morning rituals that anchor breath and intention, deliberate pauses before reaction, conscious reframing of challenges, and embodied awareness during conversations all reinforce the new calibration. The old timeline loses its grip not because it is resisted, but because it is no longer rehearsed. Integration also involves environmental reinforcement. The spaces you inhabit, the content you consume, and the relationships you maintain either stabilize your upgraded frequency or pull you back into familiar patterns. Small adjustments compound. Clear boundaries protect coherence. Nourishing inputs support physiological balance. Movement regulates stored tension. Sleep consolidates neural change. Each practical action signals to the body that the shift is permanent. Biology responds accordingly, favoring pathways aligned with resilience rather than regression. Living from the state of "it is done" transforms perception of time and effort. Instead of striving toward a distant fulfillment, you operate from embodied completion. This is not passivity, it is certainty. Decisions arise from alignment rather than lack. Conversations are approached from sufficiency rather than negotiation for worth. The body relaxes because it is not bracing for loss or scanning for validation. In this state, every moment becomes an opportunity to radiate your original cosmic signature, your most coherent, regulated, authentic expression. Tone, posture, pacing, and presence subtly communicate that stability outward. Affirming commitment to this shift is not about repeating empty phrases, but about reinforcing identity. Identity drives behavior. When you identify as the version of yourself anchored in clarity and expansion, choices follow that standard. Interruptions and challenges still occur, yet they no longer destabilize the foundation. The mind returns to center more quickly. Emotional waves pass without redefining self-concept. Momentum builds as consistency replaces oscillation. Sustained embodiment creates cumulative effects. Relationships recalibrate around your steadiness. Opportunities align with your upgraded expectations. Internal dialogue grows quieter and more constructive. The highest timeline stabilizes because it is practiced into permanence, reinforced by action, protected by boundaries, and energized by daily alignment with the consciousness you have chosen to inhabit.